Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. Now, in this video, what we want to do is to convert this Vuetify Components project here into a library. So essentially, when we created this project some time ago, the idea was that we want to create some very common components that essentially we would use across different applications. So for example, a login component, a register component, that is specific to Vuetify. So if we're creating an application that's related to X, then we'll just copy the component over into the project. Or if we're creating something related to Y, then we just do the same. So we just have basic components. And I haven't really touched on it for like a pretty long, good while now. I don't even remember why. I know that my schedule changed a bit, so as a result of that, I didn't really have much time to really work on this. But I don't think that was the only reason. I think maybe one of the other reason was that I kind of, it's not that I dislike Vidify. I think it's an amazing framework. It's just that sometimes I think that it's extremely heavy and there's a lot of abstraction. For example, if we look at this dense component here, you can see that all we're getting here is just a component that does a lot of stuff in the background, and then it renders it out into HTML. You can go ahead and look at the GitHub project. It's open source, obviously. The Vuetify project, because it's open source, so you can go ahead and check it out and see what's actually happening. But there's a lot of computation as opposed to, let's say, look at Vue 3 now, or Vuetify 3 now. You can actually see the native HTML element, and it's something that I actually really like. I like when frameworks or libraries actually um goes back to, it's very close to the bare metal essentially. I mean, we still do have the V table here. We have V data table here, and this is just V table. But at least now we're seeing the actual HTML elements in here. Maybe that's good in some cases because abstraction is good in some cases. I would argue when it relates to programming, but I think this will make it much faster for rendering in addition to having a smaller bundle size because essentially where it's Java, it's HTML is already there, so you don't necessarily have to be rendering stuff out or building stuff out back into HTML. It's just less that you have to do. So essentially, what I thought that we could do is make it much simpler for us to actually get these components. So these will be our pre-built login or register component, and we want to be able to just do an npm install and just import those from the library itself, as opposed to just copying and pasting the repository, which I think would be much easier. And that's what we're going to be doing today. So let's go ahead and go over to my terminal. I'm going to cd into um, development, which is a different directory than the one that we usually use. It's usually project/YouTube, but this one is going to be development repos, and this is where I'm going to just put this project into. So I'm gonna go ahead and do a git clone here, and essentially what we want to do is just clone this here because I actually do not have it locally on this setup because it's a totally new setup, so I don't really have much of the stuff that I had previously. So we're gonna paste the SSH one for this because I want to use SSH to do the git cloning. Um, well, it's just a preference for me essentially. We could use the HTTP one. That's really up to you. I already have SSH set up with GitHub, so why not leverage it? It's much better, at least in my opinion. The next thing that I want to do is actually change the name of the project to VFC. So this will be Vuetify Fedorae components essentially. And the reason for the change is not necessarily just for the Seamus plugger Fedorae, but I want it to be simple so that when it's being installed, it doesn't really take much effort because we're going to move it to the scope of the Fedorae organization essentially. So I'm going to do a at Fedorae /VFC. I think that would be much easier. It may not be as descriptive, but it's like it's much simpler as opposed to VC, which I think is probably less descriptive, even though we actually know that it's Vuetify components. But I just thought the VFC is just easier to say essentially, just much nicer. Just a preference. If you guys object to this, you can let me know in the comments. But I'm gonna save it as VFC for now. And we're just gonna go ahead and click on enter, and this should clone the repository down locally. So I'm gonna cd into well, what I want to do is to make a copy of this repository here. So VFC. Actually, what we could do is to cd into VFC, and I'm going to make a copy of this repository, and I'm going to actually call it playground. So this playground repository here is going to be where we test this out to ensure that it is actually working, and it's essentially just going to be a Vuetify, or well, a Vue project. And instead of just creating a separate new project, why not just create it and just clean it up, or just clone this and then clean it up so that we can actually just reuse it instead of just creating a new project. So if I ls now, we should have the project in addition to the playground. So we're not going to touch the playground just yet. We're just going to refactor the project here so that we can convert it over into a library. So I'm going to go ahead and open my editor. We're using Vim. I'm going to go to source components. First thing I want to do is actually change the name of this here to Vuetify, well, VF component. So we're going to give it a consistent namespace essentially. And then we're going to export all of these. So let's go ahead and rename all of these now. All right, so now that we have all of these renamed, what we want to be able to is actually export these. So we're going to create a new file in here, and I'm just gonna call this file index.js. So when I say index.js, and we want to actually import all these components and then do an export default of it. So when I just go ahead and import these, so it's gonna be import VFC login, for example, which was the first one, and this is going to be coming from that slash VFC login dot view, and I'll just go ahead and import the rest of these. Alright, so now that we have all of these imported, the next thing that we want to go ahead and do now is to do an export default for all of these. So we're gonna go ahead and say export default, default. We're gonna open our braces because we're gonna export multiple of these, and we're gonna do VFC login and comma separated, and then we just do the rest of these as well. All right, and I'm going to save this, and that should be it. Because I have a formatter up here, it's going to give me some amount of formatting. However, I am getting these double quotes and the trailing semicolon. I personally don't, and the comma as well. Well, these has to be there, but I don't like the double quotes. I prefer the single quotes. I don't want the trailing semicolons. I'm gonna just add a prettier the RC file or config file in here. So I'm gonna go to the root of here. We're going to create a dot prettier RC file. It's gonna be JSON format essentially, and I want semicolons to be false, so I don't want any semicolons, and I also want single quotes, as I would have mentioned before, and it should be true, and trailing comma, we're going to use we're gonna use ES5 as it, so that should be it. If I save this, I'm gonna just do a direct set, and there we go. So that should be that. So I'm gonna go ahead now and go back here. If we go back to components and I save, now we should get, well, we get the commas, semicolons are removed, but I think I made a mistake with the config as it relates to single quote colon. It should be single quotes. Well, single quotes. It should be single quote, not quotes. So let's go back in here and save again, and now we get single quotes. So perfect. So that should cover it for the exporting of this. The next thing that we want to do now is to move over to the main.js, which is going to be an entry point, and this is where we're going to do the configuration for this. All right, so what we want to do here is to go ahead and actually import all of the components. So we're going to say import star, which for all, and we're going to do as components, and this is going to be coming from /components, because we're in the same directory. And from here, what we want to do is to just want to create a store these somewhere essentially, so we can save them better. We could use it just the same, but I'm gonna do a constant, and we're gonna say components list, and this is going to be equal to components, and I want to do nullable here default, because there's a possibility that there is no export default in here, but in most cases there should be. Well, based on our configuration, there should be. And now we're going to go ahead and loop over these. So well, actually just store them essentially, or do an install for these with the view component function. And these are things that you can actually look up on the documentation. So Vuetify Components, this is what I'm going to call this. Components is going to be equal to, and we're going to call the install, well, of the install function essentially, pass view in here, and here we're going to loop over the components essentially. So say object.keys, and we're going through the components list, and we're gonna do a for each. I'm gonna take the name, and we're gonna put an arrow function in here. I'm gonna close this out as well, and we're gonna do the view component. So we're gonna say view component, and we're gonna pass the name and component list, and there we go. Let's close this out. We can save this, and that is pretty much it for this config. So we do install, loop over all of the components, and then we just add them essentially to view.component. And the next thing that we want to do is actually export this here. So let's go ahead and do that now. It's gonna do export default Vuetify components. That's not spelled correctly, so there we go. So essentially, this is essentially, if we were exporting a single component, it essentially would be almost the same, except for the fact that we're not looping over it. So that's about it. We're not looping, but in this case we're looping. The additional thing that we want to do is actually be able to check the window, and if Vuetify view is actually available, and then use the view.install for this. So I want to do a check. So if type of window is not equal to undefined, it's something that you'll see a lot when we're working with stuff like these, because we always need to check these things. So we're gonna say .view, and if that's not the case, then we can do window.view.use, and we're using the Vuetify components. And let's close this out, and that is pretty much it for the configuration here. I may change this to Vuetify Fedorae components, but I don't think that's necessary right here. The primary thing is that we wanted to just keep some consistency with the component naming itself, but for the configuration, I think this is perfectly fine. All right, so now what we want to do is to go ahead and do some configuration for the build step of this here now. So we're gonna come out of here and we're gonna go into the package.json. We already have a build script, but we need to convert it so that we know that we're targeting a library, so we're building for a library. So we're going to do a target, and we're gonna say lib. We're gonna give it a name, and I'm actually, as I had mentioned before, I'm gonna actually change this, so it's going to be Fedorae/VFC, and we want the main file, or essentially the entry point for this. So there we go. Next thing I want to do is actually change the name of this here, so it's gonna be Fedorae/VFC. And there are some additional things that we need in here. So when we build this thing out, we're going to have files in here, or where the files are going to be stored. So we're gonna go ahead and add these. So it should be files, and we're just gonna focus on the disk, because when we build this out, we're gonna build this into our disk here. So that's that. Well, this should be a square bracket. There we go. So that's essentially it. Some formatting just happened, as we mentioned before. But we also want a main. We also need to have a main for this when we actually build this out. So whenever it is imported, we know where the main entry point is from the this section, and we also want to have the module set as well. So let's go ahead and add those. So right, I think I'm gonna add this right above files. It really doesn't matter where we put this. I'm gonna say main, and our main is actually going to be at /disk/ at Fedorae /VFC, and it's going to be at .common.js, and this is something that's going to be exported, and I missed something here. Well, the comma, and we're gonna do module, and it's going to be same, so dest at Fedorae /VFC. This one is going to be umd.min.js, and we just close that out, and that is essentially it for our configuration. So we just ensure that we have our main and we also have our module, because that's essentially what this is. But I had created a play folder, and that's where we're going to test this out in. So I want to be able to actually build the package, well, run it from here right now. So we're just gonna create a script to make it much easier. However, I think moving forward, switching this up into a mono repo where we have the playground and the package itself, or the library itself, in addition to, for example, the documentation, if we, moving forward, if that's going to be needed, having this in a mono repo would be much better, and will be much more efficient, I would say. But I think that's next step type of thing. So I'm just gonna create a very simple script that will just do that for now. So we're gonna call it play, and this is just gonna cd into the playground, and then it's going to do a yarn serve, because again it's just a Vue project. So we're gonna go ahead and save this, and I'm going to go ahead and quit because I think that should cover all of the configuration. So if we do a yarn build now, we don't have we won't be able to actually build it. That's because we have to do a yarn install first of all, because that's not something that I actually did. So let's do a yarn install. All right, there we go. So now that that's installed, we can do a yarn build. All right, so we seem to have an error or multiple errors, and I know exactly why that is the case. So let's vim go here, and the problem is that the names that we actually use are different. So we didn't update the names because it's checking for the name in here, and we don't have the same name. The casing should be fine, but I'm actually just gonna change this out, and we're gonna change this to VFC. This one is forgot password, and we can save this. We're gonna get some formatting, but that's fine. All we really care about is just updating the names. I'm gonna do this for the rest of these as well. All right, so that should do it for all of these now. So if I should just quit this here, I'm gonna clear this out and do a yarn build again. All right, so for some strange reason, we're still getting an error on all of these. Oh, I think I know where we're getting the error. So we actually need to clear this out. So in here, we're doing a lot of importing in here. So as you would have seen, and we're not using these anymore, and we actually changed the name. So as a result of that, we have to actually just get rid of those. We're actually gonna clear out everything in here except for the app. So let's go ahead and save that, and we can now quit, and now we should get this build. All right, and there we go. So now you can see that we have our project or library being built, and we have the files that are built in the disk, and you can see that these are the same files that I would have mentioned inside of the package.json. So this one and also this one. This is going to be important, but it's going to be important actually inside of the project itself, because we're going to need to import the CSS in here in the project that's going to be used in the library itself. It's a little bit large. It has a high file size, so we're getting this warning already, and that is essentially just Vuetify, I would argue. Vuetify is a really heavy component, arguably. But we can always fix this up. There are some edits that needs to be done to this, but what I want to do is actually just get the core of this being a library itself, and that's about it that we want to be focusing on, at least for this aspect of here. So now we're going to actually test this out. So before I do that, let's just ensure that, well, what we can do is actually just look at you could ls this, and you can see that we have everything that we essentially need in here. We can look at the Fedorae, and we can see we got everything in there. So that's that. We're gonna cd into playground because we're gonna link this up and ensure that it's actually working. I'm gonna vim go in here, and we're gonna do some cleanup now. Package.json. I think we can leave these as is. Those are fine. We're not gonna change anything there. Inside of the app.view, I'm actually gonna change out. I'm gonna clear this up, to be honest. we're gonna just import everything, which can be good and bad, but for now we're gonna keep it simple. To be honest, we're just gonna keep it simple. So let me just go ahead and do VFC login, or you could do VFC login with the I think this kebab case. Not just do the camel case. Save this, and so that's that for here. We don't need any of these, so I'm gonna delete these. And this is just to confirm that we're actually getting this from the component library itself. So what I want to do now, I'm going to go to the main, and even before we do that, there's one thing that I have not done just yet, and that is to actually link this up. So I'm going to cd back up, and then we're going to do a yarn link so that we can link this so we can work on it locally or test it locally, and then we're going to go ahead and install it into a project that we're going to be using, which is the playground. So now we can well, I need to do yarn link, and we need to do add. I'm going to put this in brackets. Don't think it matters, but I'm going to put it in there anyways. And now we have it essentially linked to here, and from this point we can actually go ahead and set this inside of here. Now set it up. So it's essentially in similar ways of how we would install the normal projects essentially. Well, we'd install a Vue plugin or so. So let's go ahead, or a library or whatever. So go ahead now and install it. So I'm gonna call it VFC from at Fedorae /VFC. And we also need the CSS in here. So we're gonna go ahead and import VFC. Well, it should be at Fedorae /VFC /this /VFC.css, because that's the name that we would have got from here. And then we want to actually use this VFC is defined but not use, well, because we're gonna use it now. So view.use, and we're gonna say VFC. One additional thing that I want to do is to do set the right to left false. So we're gonna do view dot prototype Vuetify is equal to, and this is going to be set to false. Not sure if this has, I don't think this has any effect on this here essentially, but I want to have this set. So that's essentially it for the configuration. So this is how you would essentially install this into your project when you're working with the Vuetify components library here. Well, our Vuetify components library, so the Vuetify Fedorae components library. So we're gonna go ahead now, and that's it, that's actually it. So we could run this and test it out. What we should be seeing is the login page when we run this. So let me go ahead and clear this out, and then do a, well, I need to install, so I do a yarn install first of all. And then we can do a yarn serve. All right, so we have an error here, and not sure, so that we can't resolve the CSS file. Let's see if we can do a yarn link, if we can do the yarn link again, and then try to serve it and see if that will help, because maybe the install actually broke it, not sure. Alright, so we still seem to have the issue. Let me go ahead and cd back up a directory and then do a yarn build again. I want to actually see if I have the correct path for the CSS file there. All right, so yes, I actually made a mistake. So it was this, so it was this, then slash there. So I CD now into, I'm gonna CD back into Playground now, and then we can just open this Vim, go back to main, and then slash add Fedorae slash that. So I think that should be it. No. Let's keep our fingers crossed. So let me go ahead and serve this now. Awesome. So I guess we figured that out. So let's go ahead and open our browser and go to localhost 8080. And there we go. So now we're seeing our login page. We're getting the styles. We're not getting the image. There should be an image here, but that's because we're not importing that essentially. I probably could put a placeholder there, but that's not going to be the focus for this video here. So now we want to be able to confirm that this is working 100%. So we're gonna go ahead and change our component that we have in here. So these are being imported globally. I probably would not do that, but it works. I'm gonna change this to, well, I think register is very obvious. What were the other ones that are there? Image image upload preview was one of them. I think that was the last one that I created. So image upload preview. We're going to serve this again. So right now we're using it locally, so we're having it linked. So in the next video, what I'll do is I'll push it to npm, and then from there we'll be able to actually do a yarn or npm install and install it into a project, another project, and use it from there. So now we can see that we're having it work, because now you notice that we have our image upload components. There are some additional configuration that I want to do. I want to remove some of the styles and stuff that are actually in these, and that's what we're going to be looking at also in the next video. So that is pretty much it. I don't think there's anything else. These containers, we're going to be removing them and just essentially just leaving the base of these. So that will mean that the external project that will be using this library, they will be the one to configure the container and rows and stuff like that. All right, so I think that really covers everything that we wanted to touch on. We've converted this to a library, so we converted the project into essentially a single file component library, but also it has multiple components, and we're able to do an npm link, and we should be able to do npm install soon enough. You guys can leave comments to let me know what you think or how we should progress moving forward as well, if you have any suggestions. So thank you for watching again, and I'll see you in the next one.